Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And now we'll continue with our reading and discussion of the book, The History of Romanism by John Dowling. We are in, page 225 of the book, and this is subsection, if I can find it, 43. On page 225, we're about halfway through that subsection, and the subject of our discussion is these celebrated decretal epistles, or the pseudo-Isidorian decretals, or the Isidorian decretals, or the papal decrees. You hear them referenced by several different names, and I'll have to be careful as I use the different names by which these decretals are known to explain to my listeners what we're talking about. There is the dogmatic statement by the Roman Catholic Church that the popes are the immediate successors of the Apostle Peter, that there's an unbroken succession from the Apostle Peter all the way to the current pope. Every one of them passed down the authority of the Apostle Peter to each successor. And they go so far as to say that the Pope is the Apostle Peter, no matter which Pope of which age. And this is to justify the Pope's continued claim to power, as if Peter had any power in the church by Christ. Look, Jesus is the rock and foundation of the church, not Peter. So the very foundation upon which the papal succession is built is faulty, to say the least. It's a pretension from the get-go. But the papacy had a problem. Each time it was challenged to prove the unbroken line of succession, pope after pope after pope, from Peter right down to the present, there was a gap in the record. They couldn't prove it. This was an embarrassment to the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy. The papacy couldn't uphold its assertions and its powerful claims unless it could fill the record with the names and the decrees of popes that were unaccounted for. So the papacy went to the great length of filling the gap with fictitious popes, thereby so they could prove the continued line of succession from the Apostle Peter. And the trouble of it is, it was a very clumsy production. There was another agenda at this particular time, and that was to use these fictitious popes and to fill their histories. Of course, you have to have something to substantiate the claim that these popes existed, so Rome had to produce some historical record of them. They not only created these popes, but they had to give them life, okay? So they published, as it were, all the pretended decrees of these pretended popes. And when they produced these histories, these papal decrees that were supposed to be written and uttered by these pretended popes, they demonstrated a power and authority that was godlike. Okay? They used this opportunity to form the basis for the belief that the Pope is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. They simply turned these fictitious popes into gods and substantiate their existence by all kinds of made-up records, all kinds of made-up authority and power which they wielded. And the kings of the earth were their vassals. And the churches were all subject to these fictitious popes. Okay? And now, based on this pretended history and these pretended popes, the popes used this as the precedent set to determine what the power of the pope should be. And they've used every opportunity to elevate and strengthen and grow the power, the strength, the jurisdiction of the popes to the point where he's literally Christ on earth. All right? These are phony, false decretals. They were clumsily assembled. They were forgeries, and in a later century, when scholasticism became more important and people began to read, and the printing press and one thing and another, scholars began to research history. And they discovered these clumsy histories of the popes and came to the unanimous conclusion that they were made up. And so what does that automatically tell us? There is no continuous line of succession from the Apostle Peter to the modern day popes. That Rome's claim of apostolic succession is phony. And more than that, the Pope's power over the kings of the earth and the peoples and the churches is all phony as well. Okay? It literally destroys the foundation of the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy lock, stock, and barrel. And it was all produced by the papacy's own hand. The Roman Catholic Church created this history, which resulted in its complete undoing. But still, the popes demand that it be obeyed, that the papacy be obeyed by kings, princes, potentates, all the governments of the world, that there's no limit to the jurisdiction of the pope, that the pope is the supreme sovereign in the world, and the papacy is the judge of every man, and no man may judge him. And it's all based on these forgeries. All right, this is what we're talking about, the decretal epistles of these pretended popes. Now, we'll continue the reading. He said, in reference to the decretal epistles, the historian Daly remarks, quote, of the same nature are the epistles attributed to the first popes as Clemens, Anacletus, Euristus, Alexander, Sixtus, Telesphorus, Hyginus, Pius, Anicetus, and others, down to the times of Siricius, which is to say, to the year of our Savior, 385 A.D., which the world read under these venerable titles at the least for 800 years together, and by which have been decided to the advantage of the Church of Rome very many controversies, and especially the most important of all the rest, that of the Pope's monarchy. Okay? This fictitious writings of these fictitious popes literally establishes the Pope's monarchy, the monarch of the world. Without these phony decretals of these imaginary popes, the Pope has no monarchy. The Pope is not a king. The Pope is not a lord. Neither is he King of Kings or Lord of Lords. So the existence of the papacy relies upon the world still adhering to the decrees, these false decrees and these false epistles of these false made-up popes. And he says this shows plain enough the motive, or rather the purpose design of the trafficker that first circulated them. Okay? What is that purpose? To elevate the papacy to godlike status. The purpose of these false decretals becomes obvious once one discovers that they're false. It was to give a phony platform upon which the Pope would rule the world. Now he says the greatest part of these are accounted forged by men of learning. Okay? Historians, church historians, scholastics have all reviewed these phony documents, come to the realization that they are forged, that they are phony, that they are made up, which reveals the purpose for which they were written in the beginning. He says the greatest part of these are accounted forged by men of learning, for indeed their forgery appears clear enough from their barbarous style, the errors met with at every step in the computation of times and history, They couldn't even get their dates right. The pieces they are patched up of, such as stolen here and there out of different authors. That's right. They took facts and figures from various authors, most of which were notoriously erroneous to begin with. In other words, they plagiarized other people's works. And it says whose books we have at this day to show. In other words, the evidence is still extant. Where they got what sources they took from these various works to create these papal decrees. I mean, they've been caught red-handed, is what the author is trying to convey here. They've still got the books that the popes used to forge these documents. He says, whose books we have at this day to show, and also by the general silence of all the writers of the first 8 centuries, among whom there is not one word mentioned of them. Okay? Not only are they proven forgeries, but you can search all the rest of the history for 8 centuries. There's not one word mentioned about any of these popes, nor any of their writings, which proves they were all born in a day. Okay? It's conclusive. They're forgeries. No one can argue otherwise, not without heaping upon his head universal ridicule. It's a non-subject. It's a no-brainer. Nobody's going to enforce these papal decrees. They are childish creations. Okay, no one who wants to maintain their credibility would defend these papal decrees as the basis for the power wielded by the popes today. But the popes still use these as their justification. Okay? Despite their own faces, they still demand to be King of Kings and Lord of Lords based on these abject forgeries. Okay. Now, if what I say is true, that the Pope exercises, as it were, the power of God on earth, and that the kings of the earth are his vassals, then you can see that every king of the earth is not a true king. His government is a pipe dream. He's serving not Christ or the people, he's serving a fraud. And to the degree that the United States government has become the battle axe, the military battle axe for the papacy to conquer the rest of the world for the Pope, you can see that the United States government is a fraud. At the least, a fraud. And every tax dollar that you pay to this papal government is used to make war against Christ Almighty. To the degree that your tax monies are used to produce the greatest military machine in the history of the world, to be the global police force exercising regime change wherever the Pope demands it, you know that that government and your tax dollars are used to serve Satan's man in Rome. Okay? You still have loyalties to the government of this country, whether it be Democratic or Republican? Is this truly a Christian nation? Then how does it so faithfully serve Satan? How does it so faithfully serve the man of sin, the son of perdition in Rome? If it's a Christian nation, why does it not, like all godly governments in the past, renounce the papacy as antichrist? Kick the popes and the priests out of the halls of government. Kick the Roman Catholics out of government. Every Roman Catholic that serves in elected and even an unelected office in our government are there for one purpose, and that is to put the Pope's laws into print in this country and to force every American to obey not God's holy, immutable, and eternal law, but the Pope's Roman Catholic canon law. I can't stress this enough. And for those who doubt and think that I've gone off on a tangent, I'm not the only one that believes this. Richard Bennett produced a video on YouTube. I implore my listeners to watch that video. It's entitled Vatican Control by Civil Law. Vatican Control by Civil Law. Now, Richard Bennett was a Roman Catholic priest for decades, and he was miraculously saved by the Savior, Christ Almighty. And he came out of the Roman Catholic Church, and he exposes it for the synagogue of Satan that it is. And not only that, but he shows how the Vatican controls our government, and that the civil laws of our government are fashioned after the image and likeness of Roman Catholic canon law. Thereby, the whole nation, no matter what it professes with its mouth, must obey Roman Catholic canon law, and the civil governments impose these laws upon us. And we've also read and discussed the book Roman Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley, where James A. Wiley described the exact same system in England, where the bishops of the Roman Catholic Church meet in synod on a regular basis to discuss legislation, laws. And when they draft these laws, they're sent off to the papacy for its approval and signature. And when they're returned to the College of Bishops, they are then shuffled off into the universities, which draft these laws in such a way that will not offend Protestants and non-Roman Catholics, and they're codified in civil law, and then imposed upon not just Roman Catholics, but every American. This is how we are made to obey the Pope. Okay? And the same power of deception takes place in the very halls of government. The executive, the legislative, the judicial, all three branches of our government are under the same papal influence. The Roman Catholic Church runs our government. Okay? It's not a new thing. It's as old as the Roman Catholic Church itself. This has always been the hue and cry of every pope, that he should be, as it were, God on earth, and that the governments of this world should serve him and him alone. And we have no right to think that it's any different in the United States than it was in any other nation in the Dark Ages. All right? This is the purpose of reading this book. This author, John Dowling, confirms what has been confirmed so many times here on Inquisition Update throughout the last decade. The papacy controls the governments of the world, even the United Nations, even the World Court. Okay? Nobody, no court in this world can bring a pope to justice. No world court can try a pope for pedophilia. No court in the world can convict the priests of the Roman Catholic Church. All right? It's based on these false Isidorian decretals, these false papal decrees, and the donation of Constantine. That's what the author is trying to emphasize. They are all manufactured. They are false. They are admittedly fabrications of the papacy, simply pulled out of thin air. Now, if the consequences of this begin to really soak into my listeners, you'll have a whole new idea of how this world operates and where the injustices of this world are derived. Lots and lots of answers to questions that you never even thought to ask. Okay? The world is corrupt because the monarch of this world is corrupt. And all the governments of the world follow his example. And this is why even your Protestant and evangelical church is corrupt. Because they've taken on the image and likeness of their whorish Romish mother in Rome. They're Protestant in name only. They're evangelical in name only. Okay? They are no refuge for God's people anymore. That's why so many people are coming out of the church. Many people are coming out of the church because they've just given up on religion altogether. But many of us have come out of the churches because we understand how seriously corrupted they are and who corrupted them. The man of sin himself. All right, now we'll continue subsection 44. Page 225, if you're following along, it says, when in addition to these facts we call to mind the immense power wielded by the popes and the clergy, in consequence of the mysterious terror attached to the thunders of excommunication and interdict, which we talked about a little bit yesterday, we shall no longer be at a loss to account for the growth of papal power and assumption during this midnight of the world. Okay? The midnight of the world, though people were stupid, ignorant, had no clue what the Bible was about, and most of them didn't even know that the Bible existed. All they saw were the popes, the priests, and the governments of the world imposing these laws and making all these powerful claims of power, divine power. You know, extensions of the papal arm. That's what the civil government was supposed to be. All right? And with that came the power of excommunication, which meant if you disobeyed the Pope or you disobeyed the king of your country, you were excommunicated from the church. Means you were separated from Christ. You were separated from the church. You were separated from his grace. You were separated from the sacraments. Hell was going to be your home. You were damned. If you were excommunicated from the church, you were eternally damned. And interdict was the way the papacy imposed these excommunications on entire nations, if he wanted to. Okay? If there was a rebellious nation or a rebellious king, or even someone who might have insulted the Pope, in retaliation to get the people back into control, would issue an interdict and close all the churches. Nothing, the church would not function in any respect except to baptize babies, to lay a claim on the babies, and then extreme unction to gather up the wealth and the bequest of the dying person on his deathbed. Other than that, you couldn't get married, you couldn't have a burial, you couldn't partake of the sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church. You were shut off from salvation. That was the power wielded by the papacy and enforced by the government. All right? When, in addition to these facts, we call to mind the immense power wielded by the popes and the clergy, in consequence of the mysterious terror attached to the thunders of excommunication and interdict, we shall no longer be at a loss to account for the growth of papal power and assumption during this midnight of the world. We're talking about the unlimited power of the man of sin in Rome, and we'll talk more about it when we get back from the break. We're talking about papal thunder. What is papal thunder? When is it that the papacy thunders in this world? The author says during the Dark Ages, excommunication received that infernal power which dissolved all connections, and the unfortunate or guilty victim of this horrid sentence was regarded as on a level with beasts. Okay? When the papacy thunders your excommunication, you are enemy number one of the church and of the state. If the Pope excommunicates you, there is an all-points bulletin issued in every jurisdiction for your arrest and your execution. And if anyone protects you, feeds you, gives you drink or clothing, or in any way, even imagined, they come under the same thunder. All right? It's like today would be like harboring a terrorist. If you have been excommunicated by the Pope or one of his priests, if anyone gives you any help at all, they are accused of harboring an excommunicant, harboring a terrorist. And they're treated with the same brutality that the excommunicated was. Okay, that dissolves all connections. You are no longer connected to your mother. Your mother will turn you in a heartbeat. If you've been excommunicated from the church, to reduce or minimize or eliminate her potential suffering, you won't go to your mother for a drink of water or a cup of soup, because you bring her under the same condemnation. So your mother rats you out to the Inquisition. Even your own flesh and blood mother would rat you out to the Inquisition. Much to say about your neighbors or fellow acquaintances. And if anyone saw you, they were to immediately report you to the authorities, and the civil government would arrest you and put you into the Inquisition. That's how the Pope ruled supreme. He had the threat of death. If the Pope issued his papal thunder against you, all heaven and earth was disconnected from you. Okay, you were separated from heaven, and your earthly brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers would renounce you as a heretic to preserve their own lives. Okay, during the Dark Ages, excommunication received that infernal power which dissolved all connections, and the unfortunate or guilty victim of this horrid sentence was regarded as on a level with a beast. Okay? What do you do with beasts? You shoot them, right? In Roman Catholic canon law, it's no crime to kill a heretic. Okay? This is where we get bounty hunters. Okay? This is where bounty hunting got its origin. People would literally make a business out of seeking out excommunicants. Okay? Turning them into the Inquisition, or dead or alive. All right? There was no protection for you anywhere under the sun if the Pope issued his papal thunder against you. Now, if the excommunicant was a king, it says the king, the ruler, the husband, the father, nay, even the man, forfeited all their rights, all their advantages, the claims of nature and the privileges of society, and was to be shunned like a man infected with the leprosy by his servants, his friends, or his family. No, do I need to say any more? If the papacy thundered against you, there is no friend of yours anywhere to be found in this world or in heaven above. Now he says, 2 attendants only were willing to remain with Robert, King of France, who was excommunicated by Pope Gregory V, and these, his 2 friends, threw all of his food that passed his table into the fire. You're not allowed to give succor, food, or drink, or raiment, or protection, housing, to an excommunicant. So his 2 friends were no longer friends, were they? They took his food and threw it in the fire. This is the King of France, King Robert. All right? Indeed, the mere intercourse, having anything whatsoever to do with a proscribed person, incurred what was called the lesser excommunication, or privation of the sacraments, and required penance and absolution. Okay? So if you were caught doing anything to help a heretic, an excommunicant, you suffered excommunication as well. Okay, this is how Satan's man in Rome ruled over the kings of the earth and over the people of the earth. This was the Dark Ages. This was a point in time when the man of sin was clearly revealed. The son of perdition. That wicked that Paul spoke about, which would rise to power immediately after the Caesars were taken out of the way. History records his rise and all of his acts, all of his diabolical acts. We have all of history to attest, in every century, to attest that the papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the little horn. God's people have never been ignorant about who the Antichrist is. That is, up until about the 1800s, when futurism began to be taught in the Protestant churches and seminaries, saying that the Antichrist was not in history, and it's not now. The Antichrist is a single individual that comes just before Christ's return, and the whole Christian world adopted this papal nonsense, and thereby exonerates the papacy of all of its diabolical history. That's why you hear no conversation anymore about the donation of Constantine or the pseudo-Isidorian decretals or the false claim that the popes are the successors of the Apostle Peter. You find no declamation of the papacy as the Antichrist. You have nothing but Roman Catholic Church declaring domination over the other churches, and the other churches capitulating and ecumenically reuniting with the Roman Catholic Church in the name of peace and unity. I stress this over and over and over again. We're talking about the Dark Ages, the midnight of the world. And I'm pointing out clearly that our generation, the generation that we live in, is even more dark than it was then during the heyday of the papacy. The papacy has gained in strides that cannot even be comprehended in our generation, ever since futurism began to be taught in the Protestant and evangelical churches. In this day of enlightenment, of computers and lightning-fast communication, open libraries, even on the internet, you can read any book that was ever written, all of it. And the papacy excels in our day more so than he did in the Dark Ages, and it is inexcusable. It's an unspeakable horror. Words fail me. Words fail me to describe the global apostasy that is Christianity today. Now, before someone accuses me of damning Christianity and renouncing Christ, because I know there are people out there that are wicked and try to put words in my mouth, I attest that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that by his blood I am redeemed. And no man enters heaven unless he's been redeemed by the blood of the precious Lamb of Almighty God. There's no salvation outside Jesus Christ, the rock and the foundation of the church. He is my morning, noon, and night. He is my Alpha and my Omega. I am a biblical Christian. I make no apology. And I shame anyone who would use my words this morning to say that I've renounced Christ and Christianity. I maintain biblical Christianity. It's a very difficult thing to find in this dismal, dark world we live in today. Now, everywhere that the excommunicated were debarred of a regular sepulture, you know what that means? If you were excommunicated by the Pope, it was forbidden to bury your body if it was ever discovered. You were not to be buried. Your bones were left in the ditch. your flesh to be eaten by dogs. And once the flesh was completely cleaned, your bones could be then burned and your ashes thrown into the river. You were denied burial. That's how much the Pope's power affected those who he issued his thunder against. Everywhere the excommunicated were debarred of a regular sepulture, a regular burial, which has, through the superstition of consecrated burial grounds, been treated as belonging to the ecclesiastical control. You want to know who controls the cemeteries? The bishops of the local jurisdiction. Okay? And that's why there are Roman Catholic cemeteries. You can easily depict them by all the statues of Mary and a crucifix with an emaciated Jesus on a stick, and all their imagery and idolatry in their cemeteries, all their lighting of candles. And then there are cemeteries for the heretics. In every town that you go to in the United States of America, there are at least 2 cemeteries. One for Roman Catholics and one for everybody else. Okay? That's because the burials are left up to the ecclesiastical control, the church control. If you're a Roman Catholic, your body belongs only in a Roman Catholic cemetery. And if you are a dog, you can be buried anywhere. It's in your face. You can see it in every community. Catholics don't allow their bodies to be buried with heretics and schismatics and the excommunicated. And likewise, Protestants don't want to be buried in the presence of idolaters. Okay? So there is still visible evidence in every community in this country that there is still, despite all this ecumenical peace and unity they're propounding, there is still the papal power presiding over all of it. All right? Now, continuing, he says, but as excommunication, which attacked only one and perhaps a hardened sinner, was not always efficacious, the church had recourse to a more comprehensive punishment. For the offense of a nobleman, she put a county. For the offense of a priest, his entire, the offense of a prince, his entire kingdom under interdict, or suspension of religious offices. All right? If a simple excommunication of a single individual would not achieve the effect that the church intended, then the Pope would simply excommunicate an entire county or an entire nation. And what happened then? The Pope closed all the churches. Okay? For the offense of a nobleman, she put a county, and for the offense of a prince, his entire kingdom under interdict, or suspension of religious offices. No stretch of her tyranny was perhaps so outrageous as this. During an interdict, the churches were closed, the bells were silent, the dead unburied, no rite but those of baptism and extreme unction were performed. And I describe why they still perform baptism and extreme unction. First of all, to get the initial claim of the Roman Catholic Church on all babies. So you could, during an interdict, you could take your newborn baby to the Roman Catholic Church to have it baptized, and the Roman Catholic Church would receive it into its communion, in other words, take ownership of the baby, and then extreme unction, where the priest presided at the foot of the deathbed to take the inheritance from the one who was excommunicated. So So in both of these counts affects the financial gain of the papacy, of the Roman Catholic Church. Baptism and extreme unction. The rest of the performances and offices of the church were closed. You couldn't be saved, according to Roman Catholic teaching during this time. And if you died during an interdict, you were lost. Eternally lost. So what do you think this county or this nation would do in the event that the Pope thundered his interdict? They would do anything and everything in their power to reconcile themselves to the Pope. Okay? And many times, in order to repair or to undo the interdict, a nation was ordered to kill within its borders all heretics. And who were the heretics? Bible-believing Christians. This is the penance that a nation or a county or even a town would do in order to restore the ecclesiastical benefits of belonging to the Roman Catholic Church once an interdict was imposed by the Pope. They would go door to door. If they found a Bible-reading, Bible-believing Christian, they haul him out in the street, cut his head off. That's how they ingratiated themselves to the Pope. That's how, when the Bible says when they kill you, they will think they're doing God's service. This is a matter of recorded history. And it describes nothing but the Roman Catholic Church, as history clearly testifies. During an interdict, the churches were closed, the bells were silent, the dead were unburied, and no rite but those of baptism and extreme unction were performed. The penalty fell upon those who had neither partaken nor even could have prevented the offense. In other words, the righteous were punished right along with the wicked. Okay? And I make this point specifically because the Bible clearly says God will not destroy the righteous with the wicked. That's why when Jesus and the angels came to make judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham pleaded with the Lord, if there be but 5 righteous, will you still destroy the city? I will not destroy the city but for 5. And it went all on and on and on. And God simply proved that he delivered the righteous out of the city before the conflagration. Okay, that's not the case with the Pope. He punishes the righteous right along with the wicked. Okay, those who were in full communion with the Roman Catholic Church committed no sin against the priest, no sin against the Pope. They were punished right along with the heretics in order to force them to persecute the heretics. To think to themselves, you brought this excommunication down upon us. You are the responsible party for our suffering, our spiritual suffering, and you're going to pay, and we're going to kill you. Okay? That's how the papacy paid the bounty for killing heretics, restoring pretended papal power and opening the churches. Okay? That was the reward for killing heretics and the excommunicated. The Pope can move entire nations with this excommunication, this power of excommunication. And it gets its origin from the donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals. Forgeries, abject forgeries, admitted forgeries. The penalty fell upon those who had neither partaken nor could have prevented the offense, and the offense was often but a private dispute in which the pride of a pope or a bishop had been wounded. That's right, the papacy has a history of issuing these indictments, these interdicts against whole regions simply because a pope or one of his bishops had his feelings hurt. Now, is this not tyranny? Well, the Bible plainly describes this tyranny, and history does likewise. And there's no question about what is speaking. Okay? Who this is speaking of. There's no other candidate for the man of sin, the son of perdition. History makes it absolutely impossible for anything else to be the man of sin, the son of perdition, but the papacy. You've got but one choice. You either believe the Pope is the Antichrist, is, was, and always will be the Antichrist, or there is no Antichrist, because no one else fulfills the prophecies. History doesn't record the fulfillment of these prophecies by anyone but the papacy. See how simple it is? God does not play fast and loose with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. He wants us all to know with certainty who the Antichrist is. He wants us to be certain about who our Savior is, and that we are. But he also wants us to be certain about who the great deceiver is. We're not to be deceived by Satan or his minions. And God's people are not deceived. Now, this was the mainspring of the machinery that the clergy set in motion, the lever by which they moved the world. Okay? This author just said that the clergy of the Roman Catholic Church moved the world. Do you doubt it? Many would like to, but history won't allow it. He says from the history and the Bible won't allow any other belief. Let me be clear about this. He says this was the mainspring of the machinery that the Roman Catholic clergy set in motion, the lever by which they moved the world. From the moment that these interdicts and excommunications had been tried, the powers of the earth might be said to have existed only by sufferance. Okay? The powers of the earth continued to exist only by the permission of the popes and the priests of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, how much power? And we just ask a simple question. How much power did the popes and the priests have? More power than anything else on earth. And they even determined how much power was left on earth. That's total dominion. Either that or this author is exaggerating. You can't come to any other conclusion. But not only this author, but every other author that I've read here on Inquisition Update over the past decade have said the same thing in other words. The power of the Pope was universal, it was supreme, it was unassailable, and nobody could make war against the Pope. That's how much power he wielded. And you know something else? All of that substantial power existed only because the people volunteered to obey him. If the whole world had walked away from the papacy as the pretense that it really is, seeing that the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine were forgeries, and the people and the kings and the princes of the world simply walked away from the papacy wouldn't have the power to blow his nose. But because of ignorance and superstition and biblical and historical illiteracy, the people, the kings of the earth, give their power and strength unto the beast. So what do we think of ignorance and superstition and biblical and historical illiteracy? You're dangerous to my existence. You're dangerous to your own existence. You are a fellow supporter of the Antichrist, the antithesis of Christ, and you put all of our lives in jeopardy. During the pontificates of Gregory VII, Innocent III, and their successors, while popery sat on the throne of the earth and wielded the scepter of the world, we shall see that these spiritual weapons were employed with tremendous effect.